Hello, thank you for everyone for attending this day of webinars. So for this webinar, we have the CREST, the importance of intelligence-led penetration testing frameworks. We have a panel of experts with us today from various places in government and from various companies, and we have pen testers and threat intelligence on our panel, and shortly I will hand over to them to introduce themselves. I will be your facilitator today, Debbie Jones, and before we just get started, you do have your opportunity to ask your questions to the panel today on this session. We would like that if you could type those in the question pane. If you've been on a GoToWebinar before, you know you have a question pane. If you haven't, just in your little sidebar there will be a questions button which you can click and you can type your question in there. And we will try to get as many of those questions answered for you today. We already have some questions come in from some of the attendees, which we'll be starting off with. So thank you very much. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to the panel who are with you today to introduce themselves. If we could start with yourself, Simon.
Hi there, my name's Simon Clow. I'm one of the CREST exec members. I've been really fortunate to be a member of the exec for nearly 2 years now. I am also an assessor for CREST and have had that privilege for almost 12 years, which is a scary thought in its own right. Recently, we've started the intelligence-led penetration testing focus group, or the STAR focus group. One of my responsibilities inside the exec is to actually chair that. I work for Context Information Security. It's now part of the Accenture security groups.
That's great, thanks Simon. And if I could hand over to Pete, please.
Hi, good morning everyone. So I'm Pete Cooper, I'm Deputy Director Cyber Defence at the Cabinet Office, responsible for the government sector of the National Cybersecurity Programme. I'm new in, so about 7 weeks in, having come in from private sector, and the role pretty much covers everything from strategy, policy, standards, and also the government red team. So for those that know and love GBEST, that comes under me. In from the private sector, but also a lot of the research and hacker community as well. So I founded the Aerospace Village at DEF CON, for example, and as of August was playing with satellites in the US Air Force and the hacker community. And before that, I was in at the Air Force in cyber ops and flying around fast jets. So I've had a bit of a weird career. But glad to be here. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Pete. And if I can hand over to Rob Dartnall.
Thanks, Debs. How do you follow that? You can't really. So my name is Rob Dartnall. First and foremost, I'm the Director of Intelligence at Security Alliance, the CEO there. So in reality, that means I head up the teams that do things like GBEST and CBEST and cyber, and also the intelligence team that look after threat match and do all of the intelligence sharing across all of the government and financial sharing communities across Europe. I'm also part of the CREST executive. I'm the current interim chair until the end of the year for CREST as well. And I'm also the vice chair of CTIPS, which is probably the important bit here, really. CTIPS being the Cyber Threat Intelligence Professionals Committee, which is made up of all of the CREST threat intelligence providers and exam holders, and our role really is to try and drive the quality of cyber threat intelligence and its support, especially for things like intelligence-led pen testing. So that's me.
That's great, thanks Rob. And if I can hand over to yourself, Tracey.
Thank you, Debbie. Hi everyone, I'm Tracey Jones, Cyber Resilience Specialist at the Bank of England. I've been at the Bank of England nearly 7 years now, and I'm responsible for the strategy and development of our cyber assessment tools. So that includes things like CBEST and StarFS. I'm also responsible for the accreditation of threat intelligence and penetration testing providers to become CBEST providers. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracey. And last but not least, if I could hand over to Neil.
Hi, I'm Neil Fowler Wright. I work for Hitachi Rail Group, where I'm the head of information security across the group. I'm also a member of the CREST Customer Advisory Board, and yep, I've been doing security now about 25 years, but I've still never flown a fast jet, so can't compete. There you go. Back to you.
That's great. Thanks, Neil. So we'll kick off with the first question. So just moving on to the first question. So what is the difference between intelligence-led penetration testing and traditional penetration testing? And I think that's something that kind of comes up, that people just don't know what that difference between the two are, and sometimes they just get confused and think, is that the same? So I was going to pass that one over for you to start with, Simon.
Thank you. I actually really like this question. It's one of those ones that it's sort of comes right down to the crux of the difference between sort of various testing methodologies. I've been testing for an awfully long time, more than 20 years. So for me, a lot of what is new is also old. So back in the day, we did a lot of testing where we were just trying to answer customers' fears, and that was commoditized into what is now often seen as traditional penetration testing. But at the end of the day, what we were trying to do was answer concerns that people had, and that is still there. We still see that in traditional pen testing and in sort of the scenarios that come out around that one from there. I think the big difference between that kind of commoditized, standardized work is the validity of the scenarios that are being looked at. In general, we would love to be able to cast the net wide and say we'll test every single scenario and we'll make sure that all of our customers are secure, and a traditional pen test is going to look at making sure everything's configured correctly, making sure the basic controls are in place. Where intelligence-led pen testing comes into play is we end up looking at threat actors that will be most likely to be relevant for a particular organization. So, you know, most organizations will have a threat profile that matches to them, and particular actors that are likely to come against them. And when we're doing intelligence-led pen testing, we're really trying to emulate those kind of organizations, or sort of emulate those kind of threat actors. Teeth in, try again. The difference, what does it really mean? We're not, you know, when we're doing intelligence-led pen testing, we're not just saying, okay, can we break in through the front door? There are a whole bunch of other scenarios that are relevant, and we will look at the sort of people who are trying to compromise assets inside an organization and see which of those techniques are most relevant for them, and then try and emulate those from there. So in the short answer from that one, what's the difference between the two? Traditional pen testing is casting the net wide, looking at the security of the infrastructure. And I think when we look at intelligence-led pen testing, we're looking at what policies and procedures an organization uses to protect beyond just technical control. So it starts coming into the people, starts coming into additional controls, so the layered security and how those controls interact with each other. So quite often we'll be looking to see at the point of detection rather than just trying to break in at the first point from there. That's quite a chaotic answer from a simple question.
That's great. Thanks, Simon. Is there anybody else that would like to add anything to what Simon said?
Yeah, if I may, just very quickly. For me, a traditional pen test is a valuable tool, but it gives a false sense of security because it's looking at a very specific, known set of attack vectors and traditional methodologies, whereas intelligence-led gives that broader view. So look, it forms part of the sort of the arsenal of testing for a company like ourselves, and especially with specialist technology. But it's very much, for me, it's the false sense of security that's given by a traditional pen test that this really overcomes.
Thanks for that. And then just for my part as well, it's just to expand on the intelligence piece, and that is the word intelligence. So we can have intelligence-led scenario, which is based on we've observed malware and a malware operator operating like this, and these are the TTPs, and this is how they propagate, and we can map that to MITRE ATT&CK or whatever that might be and give it to a red team. And that is the intelligence-led pen testing piece. But in reality, there's a little bit more to that, and the intelligence piece is there also to tell you why you're doing this scenario. What's the reasons we're doing this? Is it relating to a particular actor that is associated to our threat landscape? Is that actor currently much more operational in this region, or again, searching for a particular data set that we might also own? So the intelligence isn't the information part. It isn't just the you know, this is what the scenario should look like based on this. It's giving you the context and the story and why, and possibly even narrative, right? So it's not just a case of technical spiel saying, you know, the malware does this, and this. It's also got some of that narrative as, you know, how you tell the story of that scenario. That way it elevates it from not just a technical penetration test, but it elevates up into management and beyond, that talks about the potential implications if X, Y, and Z were to also happen as well. So that's just the additional layer that the intelligence piece of ILPT is as well.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. Pete, Tracey, have you got anything to add to that one at the moment?
I think those are all really good answers. I think that for me, it's going back to Rob's point about the narrative and the story. If we look at the cascade of, right, have we done some really good blue teaming to understand what is on the network and how we're defending it, and then escalating it up to eventually things like GBEST and CBEST, right at that top end of, for everything we've put in place and all of the controls we've put in place, is it actually going to cut the mustard when it comes to the high-end threat actors that we're looking at? And it is that narrative which is really important. And for me, I think one of the really important things on that narrative is that I think that for a lot of the non sort of intelligence-led pen testing, it's very much seen as a technical challenge with technical remediation. For me, once we start getting into the intelligence-led pen testing of GBEST and CBEST as an example, then the real value of that is, how do you get a shared perspective of what your actual risk is across the organization? So, for example, what I've seen work really well, and what I'm sort of talking to people about at the moment, is if you've got results of a really good intelligence-led pen test, then actually flipping the results of that into, example, a TTX into the senior leadership is a really valuable exercise, because then what you've got is you gain this shared perspective across the entire organization, irrespective of who people are and where they are within the organization, of how actually well positioned they are against those threats that have been worked up through the intelligence, through the CTI team. And I think that for me is one of the huge benefits of that intelligence-led pen testing. This is not just, by the time you get to here, this is not just a technical challenge. Can we come into the organization? It's as Rob said, it's what's the narrative behind the whole thing.
That's great. Thanks, Pete. And Tracey, I know coming in last is always awful. Have you got anything to add at that point?
No, I think everyone's kind of covered it quite well, really. I think maybe just to add, you know, with intelligence and penetration testing, you know, we've seen through CBEST exercises, you know, being able to conduct basically essentially a simulation of an advanced cyber attack. You know, it really adds value to being identified those kind of key vulnerabilities on critical assets which underpin the important business services of the organisation. So, you know, being able to run an intelligence-led penetration test as opposed to kind of traditional pen testing just gives you much more kind of value in being able to, you know, improve your organisation's cybersecurity posture.
If I could just add one last thought on that one, I think there's some really good points inside there. One of the bits that we often find that traditional pen testing is used is to validate controls that have already been put in place, which are the controls that an organisation believes they need. One of the benefits that we find with the consumption of intelligence-led pen testing, not necessarily the activity itself, but actually the follow-up activities, is working with organisations to understand the controls that they never realised that they needed, or the controls that they've got that they didn't actually appreciate in the first place. And one of the things that we often reflect back to customers is that both the greatest strength and the greatest weakness is their staff. It's the greatest strength in it. It's the most distributed, most attuned to the organisation detection system you could possibly ask for. It's also the greatest weakness because they're most attuned to doing business, and therefore not necessarily looking out for evil people like us coming to play.
Lovely. Thank you to you all for that one. Now, we have had a question come in, and I'm going to ask this now just because I think it sort of bolts onto this question. So what's the key difference between intelligence-led red teaming versus advisory simulation?
So I'll take a running stab at this one from there. adversary simulation can be it's a term for all sorts of things, but basically we're going to be taking a component of an attack and running through from there. So it may not be the full end-to-end exploitation from typically you'd have a reconnaissance campaign, some form of payload delivery, initial staging on an endpoint, and then working through an organization. It may be from an assumed compromise role from there. To be perfectly honest, they're almost two sales terms that are very closely aligned to each other, and I think there's there is merit in saying that they're heavily interlinked skills from there. So once you have an implant down, are you in a red team or are you in an advisory simulation? Well, if you're trying to keep stealthy and hide from the defensive team, I would argue you're still in a red team mode. If you're working in a much more cooperative mode, where you're feeding IOCs for the blue team to pick up on, I would argue that's more adversary simulation. But I think it's one of those ones. It'll be really interesting to see what others in the group feel in terms of the nomenclature on that one.
Yeah, I don't think there's any industry in the world that struggles with terminology as much as we potentially do, whether or not it's defining what intelligence is, ILPT, simulation versus red team versus intelligence-led penetration testing. And yeah, part of that is exactly what you said, Simon, sales, marketing. It's something that in the industry we struggle with. There is, for me, so this is more commercially where I come across it in terms of just having that commercial conversation within an organization and say, well, I've got this material that says red teaming, this bit that's talking about ILPT, this is talking about simulation attack. And I think part of the issue I see as well is just how different vendors go about it as well. So some vendors will certainly absolutely see red teaming being as it's pretty much up to my red team to deploy whatever TTPs they have within their remit, within their skill set, in order to achieve X, Y, and Z in terms of objectives. Whereas simulation is pretty much, especially from a CTI point of view, here guys, here's a MITRE attack table. These are the TTPs that we previously associated to this actor. Plus, here's a few more which are probably within their capability or remit as well, based on not just their psychology but their skill set. Try and stick within the boundaries of this. They would normally be on site, on target for X amount of time. However, if they can only get X far within X period, that's generally when they would look to decamp and move on. So it's that for me is generally where the difference is. Whereas a bit more red teaming is also sometimes, there's some organized crime groups which, if you overlaid all the different TTPs on top of each other onto the same MITRE attack table or whatever, there's a decent 60 to 80% coverage of there, and you can really give those to a red team as well, and that's much more for me, much more red teaming as well, because there is so much aggregation rather than sticking specifically to an actor or malware. So that's just my 10 pence.
That's great, thanks Rob. Has anybody got anything to add to that, or are we happy to move on to the next question now? Okay, we'll get going on the next question. So I know we've kind of covered this next one a little bit in what we've already said, but why is intelligence-led penetration testing so important to the critical national infrastructure? So I don't know who would like to start that one off.
I'm happy to do that. I mean, to be honest with you, it's one of those things you could probably put a whiteboard up on this massive whiteboard behind me with a couple of guys, and you could spend all day writing down why it's so important, all of the different reasons. For me right now, one of the main important reasons is lessons learned at a thematic level. I think it's, fundamentally when we were really pushing hard on this over the past 3 to 5 years, it was all about individual organizations protecting important business or services to different critical sectors or critical providers. which is still really, really important. For me, though, at the moment, it's much more about the collective knowledge. It's much more about sharing results. The great thing about CBEST and GBEST and TIBA and all of these things is we've got lots of very similar organizations doing fairly similar things. And there's lots of lessons learned. And for us now, the next stage is how do we bring all of those different lessons learned together, find solutions together as a community, but then also push out that shared knowledge as well and share it effectively, both whether or not that's the intelligence or just the information around how you do different things. I think from conducting, I don't know, well over, I work with lots of different red teams. So where I work, we don't actually have a red team. We're just the intelligence providers. One of the great things for me on these engagements is just seeing the wealth of knowledge an organization gets out the back end of this. It's not just about technical configurations, but all the processes and policies and the knowledge around different skill sets and the team and the support that they get for rolling out a new security roadmap and strategy and funding. I think, like I said, big whiteboard moment. You could make a tree, an ideas tree off the back of this, which would be massive. I just think it is the sheer amount of knowledge you get from conducting an intelligence-led penetration testing assessment that you get. I don't think you can get that knowledge from doing any other thing within cybersecurity at all.
And I'll follow up from the great words from Rob there, which is I think it's important to every bit of our infrastructure and every organisation that might have threats looking to go against them, which is pretty much everybody. Our adversaries challenge our assumptions. The reason that pen testing is so important and intelligence-led pen testing is so important is that allows us in a safe manner to challenge our own assumptions and see if we're right or not. Because the only way of getting ahead of this and actually sort of like poking into what we believe to be true or not, and then learning from it, is by doing it ourselves, really. But that's hard because we need to have that learning culture that I think Rob's already touched upon, which is how do we do this and then really instill the learning lessons out of all of it into that culture of continual learning, because this is going to be a continual journey. This is not going to be we're going to suddenly have an epiphany one day and then the challenge is over. That we are on a journey which is never going to end of trying to secure all of this infrastructure. So by trying to do this in such a way that we are able to learn, that's a cultural issue. By trying to squeeze every single bit of value out of the information, the data, any of the learning lessons that we're getting across all of this, so that we can do once and learn many, that's going to be the real skill of this going forwards. Because looking at the scale of the challenge that we're all seeing across every single part of the industry, irrespective of where you sit, there's a lot to do. So the more that we can do this together, I think the better for everybody, and that's the strength of organisations like CREST. So creds to the team and the framework and the body and the members, because that's helping us get the bandwidth to really start tackling this in a coherent manner, and that's the importance of frameworks.
And if I may follow that, when I think about critical national infrastructure, and I think about my colleagues across all sorts of companies and departments, there are just not enough cybersecurity skills, and more than that, because we're bringing in people with vastly different backgrounds, from audit and compliance, and as well as from technology. Most people don't have the benefit of having learnt the lessons. They haven't been through a painful breach experience where they've had to learn, the hard way, or they've experienced something, and so that they haven't had the chance to learn all these lessons. So an intelligence-led test that leads to all of these lessons learned, that leads to all of this information that can be shared, is an incredibly powerful way of upskilling the organizations which are fundamentally there to protect our critical national infrastructure, because we can't have them learning those lessons all the time, in real time, in the real environment.
Very true, Neil. Tracey, is there anything that you would like to add in there at all?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think probably just to add as well, I think what we've found with, sort of intelligence-led penetration testing, where perhaps you're looking at that golden thread or kind of end-to-end approach. It helps, bring cybersecurity to the attention of the board and the business. And historically we've seen cybersecurity being addressed by your IT department, but actually, being able to do that type of end-to-end testing, it helps, bring those cybersecurity issues, to be addressed by the business itself, which, ultimately will just, help kind of improve your organisation response to a cyber attack should one happen.
Yeah.
So it won't surprise anyone that I will definitely have a bit to say on this one from here. I think the first thing I'd say is that critical national infrastructure is not one homogeneous activity. So we've got a whole range of activities, from energy to transport to civil nuclear to financial systems and all the rest of it, and each has its own shape, look, feel, and security profile in its own right. I think one of the things that quite often gets bandied around is as it is talking to CNI as a single entity. And for a long time, a lot of the critical national infrastructures took a sort of single defensive concept of just hide yourself away from the world. And Stuxnet was a really good example of just breaking away from that, saying you're not hidden. It doesn't matter how many barriers you think you've got between you and the public internet. There are jump points and there are connections inside of that. And I think whilst Stuxnet is overused as an example, it was a really good, shaking people's minds up and bringing it forward from there. Why intelligence-led pen testing is good really is that most of those organizations, it's too risky to just go free range. You're not going to want to allow a pen testing group to plug into the control network of a power station. You're not going to want them to just do those kind of things. So you want to have clear scenarios that are mapped against credible threats. You want to test those in a controlled and managed manner, and that's really where the intelligent part, or for me, that's one of where the intelligent part of intelligence-led pen testing crosses over between information gathered and safe and controlled execution. I think one of the things that CREST did when we put STAR together as a concept, we called it simulated targeted attack and response. And what the intelligence-led pen testing often does is to give a really clear indication, and it helps the defensive teams that are inside organizations to be better. And when these activities are really well executed, we end up with an uplift both of an organization's understanding of its risks, but also of its actual ability to detect in real time. And I can speak from times when we have been doing testing engagements, and we've had one of our customers turn around to us and say, we're seeing these things here happening. Is it you? And you look at it and go, no, you've got a live incident in flight. Do we want to flip this from being us attacking you to us working with you to actually defend against a live threat actor on the ground? And it won't surprise anyone that most customers in that circumstances are very grateful for that flip. But it is, that where does this activity have a benefit? You're training the defensive team. To be brutally honest, you're really giving them a chance to uplift and see real world credible threats and improve their ability to detect and improve the timeliness of detection and reporting into the board.
Great, thank you very much for all of those. So moving on slightly into it, and I know we've covered a bit of this, but into the next question, and it's more really with the regulators for this one. So why do the regulators find intelligence-led penetration testing essential to the security framework? So I know, Pete and Tracey, you have covered a bit of this in the last question, but is there anything further that you think you can add to that?
I mean, first, I'm not a regulator, so I'll just put my hand up to that. I know Nikki's not here, which is a real shame, because she'd have loved this question. I think that really, I mean, for me, that just to pick up on the final word of that question, which is the frameworks, is that the more we have in the way of consistency, the more we can get a better view across the entire estate, across all of the different sectors. And it's that entire view which is critical at that strategic level of working out where the large challenges are. So that for me is one of the it is one of the key things, really. This is about trying to gain that understanding, whether you're a small organisation or sort of national strategic. It's how can we get a really good view and understanding of where our challenges are, and that's why frameworks are important.
Lovely, thanks, Pete. And Tracey, yourself.
Yeah, I think, just to emphasise Pete's point, getting that whole view of the sector's, kind of strengths and weaknesses is really beneficial for us as a regulator. We run CBES assessments on typically the largest organisations within the finance sector. Being able to kind of draw out those key thematic findings from running intelligence-led penetration testing like this actually has a hidden benefit. We're able to communicate those findings to the financial sector more broadly. If you look at the Bank of England PRA, we regulate maybe like a couple of hundred firms. But if you look at the FCA and all the thousands of financial firms that they regulate, those thematic findings that we draw from CBES, helps improve and uplift the financial sector as a whole. So we find, it's quite beneficial in that way.
That's great. Thanks very much, Tracey. So moving into the next question. So intelligence-led penetration testing has been around for a while. So how have the intelligence-led penetration testing schemes evolved in the past few years? So shall we start with yourself, Rob?
Thanks for that. I was just thinking desperately how they over. Well, to be honest, I've only been working on ILPT schemes for 5 years, and obviously they did predate that. And as Simon said, the old is new, and so I'm sure what Simon was cracking 15 years ago is probably relevant. Probably better to answer this than I. But from my perspective, a few things have changed. I've certainly seen some very welcome pivoting more onto purple teaming out of the back end of these engagements, which, I would say, there's nothing you can learn more about doing anything in cybersecurity than doing an ILPT exercise. But to further enhance that, real time, effort and money and energy put into the follow-up purple teaming is just critical. And I think it's, one of the biggest and most refreshing changes to the frameworks recently. I think a lot of the frameworks also have been trying to make sure that all of the intelligence providers and the red team providers work off the same frameworks in terms of things like MITRE ATT&CK, which makes mapping backwards and forwards a lot better. So I, as a CTI provider, can provide a MITRE ATT&CK table on a particular actor, and then the red team's actions can be mapped back onto the same table, just so we can see where there's differences. And we can also map lots of different organizations across the same one, so we can start to work out, is there this systemic issue across all financial institutions or all energy providers where they're all particularly rubbish at this phase of an attack, for instance, or there's a particular skills gap across different areas. I think there's been more collaboration between the different frameworks as well, and the different nations. So we're doing many more cross-border TIBER and TIBER CBEST and TIBER CBEST ICAST type engagements. Obviously, a lot of people are just picking these up and running with them themselves now outside of the framework. So we get involved with conglomerates running, global-wide 4-month-long ILPT engagements as well. So there's lots going on there. I think the important thing for me is some of the fundamentals that are still there. So making sure that this is really only exactly as Simon was saying, provided by the likes of CREST approved individuals and CREST approved companies, making sure reputation isn't damaged, because the minute some of these things start going a little bit wrong and certain things getting knocked over, the reputation, people get nervous, and we stop losing some momentum with these frameworks. And there's other parts of critical national infrastructure that haven't really adapted ILPT schemes as yet and are nervous too. So we need to keep showing how beneficial that they are, and they are conducted safely by professionals. So yeah, I don't know if you've got more on that, Simon.
It won't surprise anyone. I'll add some more. Yes. Over the last sort of 20 years, what is now ILPT has evolved massively, and I think probably there's two areas that I think are the biggest evolution. One, which is moving away from the focus on pen testers hacking and doing interesting tech, and moving much more into business understanding. So stretching out towards incident readiness, so sort of like the pre-engagement activity. So does an organisation have a suitable incident management plan? Do they have it already? Do they have properly briefed people? Do they know how to do that? Have they actually run through any exercises to validate that up front? We're seeing that getting tied into then live testing activities, and then following on into sort of the blue team at the back end of it. So that's sort of where there's been like a widening of what's going on inside the schemes, and I think that's a useful overlap from there. The other bit I think is probably sort of more from a personal observation is a change of risk. So very early on, it was let the pen testers go and find what they can find, and then people got burnt and backed off from that kind of activity. And as the ILPT schemes came on board, more formalised, certainly with some of the early stuff with Bank of England, we saw a huge caution inside taking on risky projects, that the critical functions were deemed untouchable by a number of organisations, and that you couldn't possibly get to touching that. And I think when I say the risk has changed, it's actually also it's more to do with the risk management, because the schemes are set up to enforce strong risk management, and realistically that's what the CSAM role inside the CREST scheme really is key to hook into that side of things, is to make sure that the activities that are perceived to be risky can be done in a controlled manner that meets organisations' palettes and meets the regulators' palettes, and that fundamentally isn't going to be disruptive, while still being educational. We can actually get information out of it that's going to be of value at the back end of it. Because the schemes have been running with a much more nuanced risk management process, I think the risk appetite is now opening up, and where before we had people taking on large risk naively, now people are taking on what is seen to be much more interesting targets with a much better understanding of the risk of testing those via intelligence-led pen test. Yeah, that's probably the best part of leaving that.
Okay, lovely. And Tracey, perhaps you could talk from a Bank of England perspective, how you've seen the scheme evolve really with CBEST.
Yeah, I think the guys have perhaps maybe covered the more technical aspects of it, but from sort of Bank of England perspective, the kind of evolution of the schemes over the years, looking at sort of, you started with CBEST, and now there are so many more schemes available. So TIBA, ICAS in the finance sector, but then you also have other sectors that are picking up these schemes as well, such as GBEST and TBEST. And I think the fact that there are now so many different ILPT schemes that have been created in quite a short time period, really, I think just goes to emphasise how important this type of testing is and how beneficial organisations are finding them. So I think just that kind of evolution of it, the fact that it's that those schemes have expanded so much, I think that just goes to show how good they are, really.
That's great, thank you. And Pete, Neil, have you got anything to add to that at all?
I've just got sort of one observation to sort of sum up what others have said, which is really that for me it has gone from a marketing term and mismarketed in many cases. When it was first launched, lots of people trying to do the right thing, and obviously then things like CBEST arising. But now it's a more mature product. It's something that as a customer I can invest in, knowingly and confidently, because it is a much more mature product.
I think we might have lost Debbie for a moment there.
Sorry, apologies for that. Pete, have you got anything to add to that at all?
No, I mean they're all good answers. I think an interesting sort of like follow on from that might be to sort of like, I think, probably explore across everybody where they think they need to go in the future as well. Because I think that the evolution of all of the frameworks in ILPT has been a really, really good one. But I think sort of looking at the world we're in at the moment, actually getting reflections from everybody about what that would look like going forward, I think would be really interesting. From my perspective, and I'm not going to try and counter Simon's experience in this, for considering how long he's been doing this, but I'm not saying anything derogatory at all. I think that in the past there's potentially been a perspective that people can see that the cybersecurity challenges as a technical challenge needing a technical solution, and it is looked upon that way by leadership. What's been a really nice evolution that I've been seeing is that it's more joining up here's the technical results and this is what it means for you as a business. Here's the strategic implications of what it is we're finding. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can develop that going forwards. Because if we look at the ultimate aim of this, it's all of this type of activity is to help strategically move the business into a better place regarding their cybersecurity and the threats that they're facing. So anything that we can do to better line up and make sure that the results land and are understood and are actioned by the board and are followed up by the board, that for me is where the real value for this is. Over time, we've proven time and time again that the technical elements of what we're doing here are completely doable, and there's great lessons out of that, and the reports are really good. I think really where the key value to really squeeze more value out of this is that high end, and landing it with the follow-up strategic actions is the key thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good question posed by Pete to everyone in the audience in terms of where you want to take this as well. And I think the Bank of England and the European Commission are doing some work around digital and operational resiliency, and there's been some thought papers and discussion papers and some potential legislation coming through. You know, how do we better do intelligence sharing, because that's the other part of it, because that also then feeds the board with the conversation as well. So I think I am not concerned for the future of ILPT and its importance. Absolutely not, because you're definitely seeing ILPT being written into some of this future operational resiliency requirements for most of the NIS type industries.
Lovely, thank you. So we have nearly reached the end of time for this webinar. So what I'd like to do just to finish off, and anybody who has sent some questions in, if the panel were okay, if we could send some of those questions out to you to get a couple of responses so we can go back to those people so they haven't missed out on those questions, that would be really good. So thank you. But if we could just, if there is one thing and one summing up point that you think that hasn't been covered so far in this webinar that you think just to impart to the attendees before we go. I'll give you a second there. I can see you're all thinking. And I'm really sorry, Simon, and it's only because, you know, you're at the beginning of the alphabet. I'm going to start with yourself. So Pete, you better get prepared because you'll be coming next. So Simon, what sort of thing would you like to say that hasn't been said in this webinar to the attendees?
That's a really good question. I'm going to stump you for a few seconds. I think what we've seen is that there's been a huge professionalisation of ILPT up to now, and I think what we're seeing is the organisations have been able to provide reasonably good, you know, emanation of certain characteristics of threat actors, but it's never going to be the full picture. We're never going to be able to break the law to do these activities. You're never going to be able to push the extremes to the fullest opportunities. I think it's very easy to sort of get caught up in the Mission Impossible Hollywood hacker mindset, and we do need to remember that this is a professional activity that needs to be managed, you know, in a professional manner. And whilst we need to push to the edge of what is possible and what is legal, there is a very clear line that needs to be maintained all the way through, and I think that's one of the areas that potentially we haven't explored in this panel.
That's great. Thanks, Simon. You know, you've just lined yourself up for a second panel session to cover something. Hi, if I could pass over to you, Pete. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that for me, this isn't, and I've sort of like mentioned it earlier in the panel, this isn't just about the technology. This is about the entire business. So a key element of this isn't just have we done a successful test and found the flags or whatever the objective was. It's can we translate whatever we're finding into a manner that is actionable by not just the tech team, but by the leadership team. So a key element of what we've got to do going forward is focus on that translation piece. And that goes back to a point that we've all sort of touched upon previously, which is skills. This isn't just the skills of the tech teams. This is the skills and culture of the entire organization about how they're approaching this as a challenge, which then also comes down to people and creating the time to start embedding this into the culture of the entire organization as how they approach looking at the cybersecurity challenges they're facing.
That's great. Thank you, Pete. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks. I want to just build on that. So I have two hats. One is my CREST hat, and the other is the fact I'm an intelligencer. It doesn't matter what position I hold doing intelligence. One day when I retire, I'll go back to being a desk analyst because that's what I love most, because I believe in intelligence and I believe in everything being intelligence driven. And I think sometimes we're not quite taking full advantage of the intelligence aspect of ILPT, and it's what we've been talking about here. It is not just a case of here are the scenarios we've generated, and it builds on Pete's point around communication. You know, as an intelligencer, I have ex-colleagues from government and the military coming through, and you know, I implore you, if you're building operational resiliency teams, digital resiliency teams, your own internal intelligence and cybersecurity teams, to look at these types of individuals who are leaving the military or other type organizations, who are very good at communicating and very good at communicating these types of things, and you know, not to forget about the intelligence. You know, when I see so many remediation plans after different bests or tibers that talk about we're going to fix this control, we're going to buy this tool, we're going to do this. There's not the oh, we saw on the targeting report we've got all of this leaked data and this how we're going to do this. This is our new policy for sharing. We identified these actors, so we're going to build these into our new intelligence collection plan, and we're going to invest it in this team, because that is the bit that elevates it up, which is able to communicate the technical impact into what is the impact on our important business functions, what is the impact to our overall resiliency, what is the impact to our regulatory state, etc., etc. So yeah, just don't underplay the intelligence bit. There's more from it than is currently being exploited.
Great, thanks, Rob. And over to you, Neil, for a couple of last words.
Yeah, I just wish I was as eloquent as Pete, because I'd just like to repeat pretty much word for word everything he said. But I just want to highlight specifically two things. Very much, it is not about woohoo, success, wonderful, we've achieved some sort of one clever hack with some clever piece of, you know, my favorite piece of thing, and you know, piece of attack code. It is very much about the learning for the security individuals, for the board, for the staff in general, and something which I sort of look at more, you know, considering an organization almost to be a person in and of itself. It's for the organization to learn, to build that knowledge, whether it's in an intelligence plan, as Rob highlighted, or whether it is in changes in policy or approaches, or indeed, you know, just the awareness that you give to your staff to reduce the likelihood of certain attacks and methodologies succeeding. So yeah, I just love to echo everything that's just been said. Thanks.
Excellent, thanks, Neil. And Tracey, sorry, you're in last, so have you got a couple of words to add to that?
That's okay, save the best to last.
Yeah.
So just basically echo everything that my fellow panelists have said today. I think, you know, from the Bank of England perspective, you know, we've seen how effective intelligence-led penetration testing has been via CBEST. it will be around to stay for the future. We've seen how beneficial it is, so it's not something that's going to reduce at all. Particularly looking at the future, we've got StarFS on the horizon as well, which basically moves intelligence-led penetration testing away from being a regulatory tool and allowing firms to be able to do that type of testing for themselves. And it allows, CREST typically has been previously done on, sort of the larger institutions, but with the introduction of StarFS, small, medium and smaller firms will be able to do that type of testing. So it just goes to show really how important doing that type of organisation is, doing that type of testing is for an organisation in order to be able to protect themselves against the cyber threat. And I think as we've all seen over the last year, the cyber threat is increasing, it's not going away. So it's even more important now that organisations protect themselves.
That's great. Thank you, Tracey. And definitely the best, I just want to point out there. Yeah. So yes, I'd like to say thank you very much to our panel today. I hope you've all enjoyed this session. I definitely have, and listening to all the different aspects. As I say, those people that have sent in their questions, we will get those out to the panel and get an answer for you. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to the attendees. I'll just hand over to the panel to say goodbye. So thank you.
All right, thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you, and take care, and everybody enjoy their day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you, bye.